Okay, well, good morning, everybody in the UK. Good afternoon, everyone in China, and hello, everyone, and good day, everyone in between. Sorry for being a little bit late there. We just had a few technical issues that I hopefully have fixed for this recording. So good morning, as I said, and welcome to this session on tips for trading with China, converting opportunities into sales. We hear a lot about China's relationship with the UK being increasingly sophisticated and broad and including lots of different sectors and lots of different areas. But I think it's extremely important also to remember for any company new to doing business in China or indeed expanding their trade in China that there are quite a lot of fundamentals that shouldn't be forgotten. Quite a lot of fundamental things about how to do business in China, how to convert opportunities into sales, and how to make progress in your business with China. And we're going to talk quite a lot about those this morning. And we're with Zhang Ting, who is the founder of Crayfish and a well-known China expert for many, many, many years in the UK, advising lots of companies and indeed different parts of government. So we're delighted to have Ting with us this morning. So just before we begin, I'll just give a little bit of a background on the China Britain Business Council for those of you who don't know. The China Britain Business Council helps British and Chinese businesses and organizations work together in China, UK and third markets around the world. CBBC delivers a range of events, tailored research, consultative services, and a membership program. So do check us out on www.cbbc.org. That's just a little bit of background about ourselves. And moving along then to our speaker. As I said, Ting is a vastly experienced advisor for UK businesses doing trading in and with China. She has 20 years experience of international business, China trade and investment. Ting first came to the UK to study at the University of Cambridge, and then in 2001, foreseeing the increasing cross-border trade with China, she left her career as a banker in the City of London to set up China Business Solutions. Since then, she has built the company into one of the most reputable China specialist firms in the UK and Europe, with Ting personally regarded as a leading expert on doing business with China. Ting has advised clients ranging from tech startups in Finland to FTSE 100 companies and leading financial institutions on Wall Street. In recent years, with Chinese businesses going global to follow the Chinese dream, Ting has been engaged by emerging Chinese technology groups to help expand into the European market through M&A and partnership. In 2015, Ting became a special advisor to Lord Way of Shoreditch with a shared enthusiasm to help more British SMEs trade with China. In her continuous pursuit for a more efficient way to provide SMEs with affordable resources and help, Ting founded Crayfish in 2016 with Dr. Elizabeth Hill. So that's just a little bit of background on our speaker today. And now comes the fun bit where I hope Ting is still with us. So let me just unmute you, Ting. Where are you on my list? Here you are. So good morning to you. Are you there? Okay, that sounds like a sound. Are you there? You're there, Zhang Ting, are you?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Brilliant. So just before we begin, I'm going to ask, make sure all of our listeners are clear and can hear everything. So if I could ask everyone to please click on the raise your hand button that I'm just highlighting here, that will make sure that I know that you can hear me, basically. If you could just click on the raise your hand button. A few people are doing that. Super. Okay, so I think we are okay. A few people are clicking. There we are. I can see some people clicking on raise your hand. Thank you very much. So as we go along and as Ting is speaking, if you have any questions, please do type them into the Ask a Question, Give Feedback section. That question will then pop into my computer. If it's pertinent to the flow of what's going on at the time, I'll stop Ting and I'll ask her. Otherwise, we'll save it to the end. And if we don't get to the question, I'll pass it on to Ting and she'll be happy to follow up afterwards. So that's pretty much it from me. Over to you, Zhang Ting.
Hi, thank you, David. I did have a break of like milliseconds of no signal when you spoke. So hopefully that won't happen on my end. If there's anything like that, could you, David, remind me that I can repeat again?
Absolutely.
Okay, right. Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the webinar. I hope you will, when you finish today, you have found something, you have heard something, learned something that would make a difference, that will make you do something. That's my purpose. So assume you are here, you would like to hear about how do you sell your products or services into China. Next, please. And no matter what sector you are in, normally there are some opportunities in China, but there are some sectors that have more opportunity, more low-hanging fruit, I would say. And these are the sectors I've listed. Of course, this can go on, but AI is absolutely the hottest area in China. Artificial intelligence, so a lot of money, capital is invested into that. So if you are in this sector, you will find that it's a door already open in many places. But education is also has been one of the most promising sectors. In fact, there's a lot of also investment into the UK to take UK education service providers, including schools and technology, into China. And as you know, Chinese demographic is changing very rapidly, more rapidly than people would have expected. So data says about in 10 years time, 60% of Chinese population would be over 60 or something like that. So there's a lot of business opportunity there, whether you provide a infrastructure, or you're providing services that's for the elderly care, and it's right timing to enter the market. As you know, China's e-commerce has been growing just in a speed that no other market can match. And but for e-commerce, the opportunity still remains to be retail brands into China, but also logistics players, transportation. But one of the things I noticed, if you are in China the last year, you will have noticed WeChat Pay or Alipay, which is both are electronic ways of paying money. It's now everywhere. Even you buy apples from someone along the motorway, you don't need cash anymore. That's amazing, considering a few years ago you would carry loads of cash in China. So China has completely leapfrogged from cash to electronic pay. So not many people use credit cards in that sense. So that's something you might want to consider if you are in the e-commerce sector. Agriculture and food safety has always been important, but now particularly with the government's determination to feed the nation and also to have safe food as well. So that's the sector with a lot of government support and grant available. Medical device has also been one of the sectors with ongoing opportunities, but recently there are some regulations that made it easier for Western companies. For example, clinical trials results elsewhere are now accepted, while before you have to do that in China. Although there's still regulation about therapies, etc. So whatever sector you're in, look out for where the pockets of opportunities are. Next, please. Typically, people get sales. If you go to China, go to a trade fair, plenty of them come back with a stack of business cards. And as you know, in China, everyone carries cards, so you may come back with tens of cards. Although you may not remember who they are, all of them, you have that to start with. Sometimes people find you from internet. You receive an email in your box to say, we are interested in selling your products. And many other times you already have a partner who's already English partner or a partner from Australia where it's selling to China, and their distributor might want to sell your products. So there's multiple ways you could get leads. But what you really need is just one partner. A partner that's already in that market can get you start immediately without you having to search for your own customer base, etc. That would be ideal. Next, please. Whatever you do, when you get all these leads, you really need you cannot just do nothing. You need to decide how are you going to do with this, allocate resources, think, plan for that. For example, if you're selling products, it's straightforward. You're selling this product into China. But even that, you might think some products may be suitable for China, while some others may not. So you need to look at that. If you're selling a service, then you need to really think at how you're going to sell it and what is the right way to sell it. For example, recently, a singing school from Cambridge come to see me, and they said, we have got a school that teaches children singing. It's going really well. We are now booked a place in Hong Kong in April. We're going to do that. And we would like to also sell it to China. And so I said, what do you want to do? And they said, oh, we might go to China and see if we can do that after school. So my advice is that is really difficult in China, because with the government regulation, with the bureaucracy, you would take a year to at least to get us started. Why don't you work with the Chinese companies that's already sending children to the UK for summer schools or for whatever, study tours? Then you have them in Cambridge with minimum paperwork and bureaucracy to get into China. So that is what when I'm talking about a selling preparation. Instead of selling it into China as services, you are actually selling a study tour in the UK. And the information bit is about what information you want to release to your potential customers or partner, particularly before the relationship goes deeper. For example, you may have confidential information even when you think this is just a PowerPoint. You need to look out for that. And if you're a tech business, you really need to be careful with that, because I won't talk that in detail today, but in China, NDA doesn't mean much. It's culturally everyone likes to share information. So if you have really confidential information, NDA doesn't make much difference. So best not to provide that at an early stage until you build a relation, until you're sure this is a company that you work with. And at that point, you consider NDA, etc. Of course, most important, as many other things, is who's going to do the work, and that would depend, I think, resources. So if you have in-house resources who can dedicate, decent time to pursue the leads, then that's great. Ideally, they should be Chinese speaking, or at least understand how the Chinese market works. Or you could outsource. There are many companies in China, outfits, business development or agency or brokers that you can work with. For example, some sectors like education or investment, wealth management, etc. You may use agent who's already very well plugged in the market. But with agency and this middleman route, you will lose a lot of margin, of course, because they take a big cut in the process. So another way is to look at some flexible individual people who can work with you to get you to the next step. And that is later, I can talk a bit more. That's what pre-fish is about, is where before you can afford to have someone on your payroll or as before you can commit to set up an office in China, you might want someone just to test the water. So that's something you might consider as well. Next, please. Unless you already speak very fluent Chinese and also understand the culture, you will find that communicating with China sometimes can be frustrating. But if you find the right way, it could help you expedite that process. So in England, we still remain, I think we rely on mainly still email for almost every kind of business communication. Sometimes we call, but in China, email is really now only used for very formal documents or that initial contact. When you found someone on the internet, you write to them. But then you really, if you can, call or speak on WeChat, which here you can see there's a little icon. And most people who in China, I would say, are using this now. And I would be very surprised if you find a Chinese business person who is not on WeChat. So that is a must. If this is the first time you learn about WeChat, please do go to your app store on your phone and download it and work out. Basically, WeChat is a combination of Facebook plus Twitter plus LinkedIn plus WhatsApp plus everything. And the good thing is with WeChat is you can get very personal with senior decision makers. So it will bypass you through the long wait of sending email to an export or import manager of a company, then pass it on and wait. You immediately get a response. People respond very quickly to WeChat, in my experience, and many others. But one thing I would caution you on use of WeChat is if you can set up a company WeChat account, it would be better than use personal WeChat account, particularly if it's not your own personal one, if it's someone who works for you. Because when that person leaves your company, you will lose all the history of the communication, including documents. Unlike email, you can still keep that within the company. Next, please. Even with all this remote communication, nothing beats FaceTime. Go to China. And that is something really I can't stress more. If you wanted to sell it to China, this is the most important thing. If you have a professor in your team, doesn't matter it's a non-executive director, doesn't matter it's an advisor, get them to go to China. Because the Chinese people always like to have someone with a fancy title. And that would help your company's credibility and branding, and it will also get you to secure meetings with, whether it's government official or Chinese business leaders. They always like to meet famous or established people from the UK. So if you don't have one, find one, and that always helps. One of the things I would say is when there's a problem, instead of trying to solve it in our old-fashioned emails style, go to China. I'll give you an example, real case. I used to work with a client in Cambridge. This is about 10 years ago. And their business model was licensing software modules that goes to mobile phone. And they were one of the biggest suppliers to all Chinese major handset OEMs. One day, the sales director calls me up to say, Ting, I'm just about to send an email with on the top of the email says without prejudice, and it's an email talking about why the company is owing us $1 million fee, license fee, and we believe that they should pay this, and they believe there's a problem with our software and they should not pay, and this email trail has been like 10 pages. It has escalated to me. So he said, can you have a look and see if that's okay before I send it? Do you think this can solve the problem? I had a look at the email trail without even reading all 10 pages. I called him back. I said, you need to find the next flight that you can get within your schedule to go to China to solve this. You cannot rely on this on email. And so he went, and then when he, 3 days later, he calls me back, actually emailed me back to say, I've solved this. I spent all day here with the Chinese group, the chairman, which again, a chairwoman my advice at that time was, you need to tell them you're coming with the purpose of solve this problem, ask them to dedicate 1 day for this. So he did that, and his email said, now they've agreed to pay $500,000. And the other $500,000, we have agreed milestones on how to solve that. So this could not be possible with that long email of without prejudice. By the way, I had very much believed that the Chinese side, the chairwoman, wouldn't even understand what without prejudice means. So next, please. So you plan your visit. If you do go to China, make it productive. And also make sure you confirm the time again and again, because in China, everything evolves fast. So if you book a meeting 3 days in advance, and then you got to confirm that 1 month ahead, 1 week ahead, and then 1 day ahead, just in case there's any change. Right, so now we did talk about the importance of the communication. Communication method is one thing. The other thing is what's said and in different languages. And if this is not translated correctly, your message is lost. And in many cases, I have seen that when I was sitting in a meeting, when there are other people interpreting for the meeting, I could see that message get lost or important facts get missed. And that is so important. But what's more important is not just language, it's sometimes the cultural nuances that comes with the messages. If you have your own interpreter, it's so much better because they will act on your behalf, and you will also be able to brief them beforehand so they understand exactly your product, services, and they would always clarify with you. If you do not have your own interpreter when you go to China, for example, or if your products, you leave it for your distributor to translate, and you cannot control that quality, and you do not know sometimes whether, for example, interpreter case, if the interpreter on the Chinese side does not know what you're saying, they just simply omit it. I have seen that case that the Western side, the customer said about like 10 sentences. You can hear the interpreter only did 1 sentence. Most of the other ones are gone. So that's really important. Even now, with Skype calls, you could do that. Recently, we had a client in Cambridge as a technology company wants to have exploratory discussions with Chinese-based OEMs, and they want to just do Skype calls first to save the money to go to China just for the initial discussion. And they want someone who's technical, who speaks both languages, who can actually go to their company to attend the occasional Skype calls. And we managed to find that person through Crayfish platform, someone who exactly matched the profile, and that worked really well. And the clients were able to progress through the Skype calls until they go to China to visit the company. Next, please. We heard a lot about cultural differences doing business between UK and China, and it's true. I mentioned about your sales proposition, selling proposition, but also you need to think about the way you sell. In the UK, you would go to a meeting and have a presentation. So this is our product, this is service, this is how much it costs, and you expect immediately get into discussion about pricing, and then hopefully next step, and then done. And then you can go away, send a proposal, and no. In China, it's not like that. You need to really spend time getting to know the other company, build a relationship with a aim about what you're selling, but you are going to have to adjust that style to have a more personal way, building the trust, and take time. It will take you a few meetings and visits typically to get you to the time where you actually negotiate the price. And then when you walk away from a meeting, sometimes you might think, I had a really good meeting, everyone nodding, and seems that they all like our products and services, we will get the sales. But you may know that the Chinese people are polite, and culturally they would give that, so when they nod, doesn't really mean yes to your products or services, they will buy your products. It just means we actually not acknowledge that. We heard what you're saying. And sometimes if you keep chasing, you don't get any answer, basically it just means no. Although, again, some Chinese prefer not to tell you no, but no answer sometimes just means no. I put some whiskey here and scarf here. They are real stories. Whiskey was for a Western client to visit China to have the final discussion of a multi-million-dollar online game license discussion. And that was advice I gave it to the UK client to take to visit the Chinese chairman, because I know the Chinese chairman like whiskey or any, Western spirit. Because the Chinese side see that the extra sort of personal touch was important. The scarf is related to the story I just told you. The client who flew over solved the $1 million problem. And at the airport, the client actually called me to say, Ting, what gift should I give? Because I told him beforehand, get a gift. So I said, what is the head of the other side? He said, it's a lady. So I said, get her something nice like a scarf. So he went Burberry, get a scarf. And then later the response when he get back to me was, when he gave the scarf to the chairwoman opened it and patted his hand to say, you are my good friend. That definitely helped with the discussion. I think considering the scarf's value versus $1 million is very well spent. I'm not implying you have to spend so much on the Burberry, and I'm not paid by Burberry for this, but the intention matters. Gift giving is a way the Chinese build a relationship. If you had been dealing with Chinese company, you might have received a lot of presents when they come to visit you. But part of the building relationship. New to this phrase, 关系 basically means relationship plus network. It's a kind of not necessarily all means personal, but it's something that really helps to do business in China. Particularly if you are in service sector, if you're trying, for example, if you're in wealth management, investment, or if you're trying to sell consultancy, etc., it always helps to have that network, word of mouth, and people's trust. I wanted to touch a little bit on corruption because this is something you will come across one way or another, indirectly, directly in China if you are going to do business there. However, the biggest and most important message we'd like to give it to you is when you're in China, don't do what Romans do. Because you're not Chinese and you don't know how the system works. It's better to stay clear completely. Of course, legally you have to do that as well because of the British Anti-Bribery Act, etc. But also in China, the government has launched massive anti-corruption campaign recent years, and it's improving. Particularly now, the government's focus is also now onto the commercial corruption, while before it was more in the political, in the sort of government system. So that is improving. Although there's still, some problems there. If you have this kind of concern or question, you can come to me afterwards with your question. I can probably also explain a bit more. Next, please. I think this is our last formal slides of the content. So very briefly, you do need to carry out some due diligence, depending on how serious the relationship, how much affects your business. Then you might want to have a very in-depth due diligence carried out by professional outfits, or you might want to just know a little bit more about the company, a light touch. But in any case, this is important. I've heard and I've seen many people burn their fingers by jumping into a relationship with Chinese company without knowing enough about the company, the people behind it. And of course, in different industries, there are regulations that you really need to know, and do not assume what works in Hong Kong, for example, or elsewhere that would work in China. It's totally different. There's a lot of government rules and regulation for almost every sector, although some sectors have higher entry barriers than others. I mentioned IP, I mentioned protecting your information. However, you cannot be overprotected because then you are not going to build your market share in China. You've got to have that balance. In China, everything comes down to having the right products, right pricing. So you may not just be able to sell whatever you sell internationally. You may have to give some consideration to the Chinese market, always leave room in that sense. And in China, paying out of the country is not just going to your bank and remit. There is a procedure. Companies have to get approval from various levels of government as well. Even in a bank, there's a procedure. So if you're selling, for example, software license, that would take you months for the first payment. In my case, there was a client who did a software license and the gaming license. It took them 90 days for the first payment to go through with all the contract registration approval. But the next one only takes 30 days. So that is something you really need to bear in mind if you have a big cash flow coming that you rely on to pay salaries, etc. And now with many Chinese companies looking to expand abroad, they tend to acquire companies that work really well with them, particularly if they're buying from these companies. So be open-minded that if there's something you are thinking that you would welcome to do. Finally, what I like to say is, although China has a big population, in fact, over 1 billion, of course, but in China, the people who can work for you, you will find actually is very limited in the right sector, right skill set, and with what you can offer. In China, salary has gone up really very quickly in the last few years. In Beijing, you almost expect jobs for bilingual technical people almost the same as UK now. Although in some other cities, in the tier 2 cities or western side of China, you still have a big difference compared to here. So that's something you need to think about, whether you can afford to have someone immediately now, recruit someone, or you want to have someone part-time work for you, flexible, and then until you can afford. Because in China, again, the labor law now is that you cannot just fire someone easily like it used to be. You still have to pay them redundancy and all sorts of benefits. So it's very costly to fire people, of course, to hire people, and people also move on more quickly as well. Next, please. So that's pretty much about what I'd like to say about the selling to China. This is now about Crayfish, what we do. Crayfish.io is the platform we operate. And essentially, it's the first one, I believe the only one at the moment, that's dedicated to Chinese-speaking projects, whether these are translation or doing your digital marketing, WeChat, opening research in China, get someone to call in China. It's all those flexible work that you would like to outsource to someone. And you can just go to Crayfish.io and post a project, like you go to Airbnb, post your requirement, and then you can find someone who's going to bid for your work, and you pay them all through the platform. Until the work is done, they will get the payment. The pay would be withheld at the platform, giving you security. This is we would call DIY for a smaller project. The biggest benefit to anyone using that is the fast turnaround. You can post a translation requirement on the Saturday and you'll get it done on Sunday. And that happened many times. Or you could do that in the evening, and in the morning it could be done, because some of our freelancers, some of our people who do the work we call freelancers, are based in China. So time difference works. And the cost savings. Because there's no middleman involved in all this processing of inquiries and proposals, you tend to get a very good saving compared to the traditional ways. But for bigger projects or for more complicated projects, we do offer hand-holding. We will help you manage that. We call enterprise service, where we would make sure everything is done according to your requirement, using the right resources, whether it's from freelancers or from other partners we work with. Next, please. So these are the business areas typically you need to consider when you do business in China, whether it's translation or WeChat or marketing. Sometimes you may want to design a Chinese a leaflet that looks more like a Chinese, for example. In all these areas, you can find someone to do that on crayfish. But I would also like to know, out of those business areas I listed here, what area would you like to know more for future webinar, for example? You can either answer now, or you can put that into notes to David afterwards, so we can probably come back with the topics you'd like to hear next time. Thank you. That's all I've got to say.
Thanks.
I think the next slide. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Ting. Yeah, thank you very much for that whistle-stop tour of ultimately those core things, and sometimes in the as I said, this sort of complicated and sophisticated and overwhelming market that can be China, we can lose sight a little bit of the very fundamental things that are necessary when companies are trading there. And I think there's a really key thing that you said a couple of times, Ting, that well, as somebody who lived there for a very long time, you know, as a UK company trading with China, we're not Chinese, and don't try to be, because there is a whole subtle culture and a whole subtle way that business works there that you will never see and that you will never be privy to. So don't try and interpret it. And I think that's a really good piece of advice. And when people get caught up in the culture of trying to do business with China, I always say, you know, fundamental things. Say please and thank you and smile, and you'll be surprised how universal those things are across the world. Now, if people have some questions, please do type them in. I've got a couple to start with. Ting, one question that came up from John was about leads from trade fairs. Making a judgment on which leads to follow up on and which not to. I don't know if you have any advice or suggestions on that.
Okay. I think first, if you can remember out of those leads, for example, if you can remember who said what and how eager their attitude was at the trade fair, that helps to start with. Some of them just come and say, oh, interesting, leave your card. Well, some of them say, really good, and we really would like to, and give you a lot of information at that time. Those are the ones to start with first. I would say prioritize the leads first. And second, I think you needed to strike the iron when it's hot and try to follow up. They went back to my slides to say you need to think about how you like to follow up, who's going to do that. If you have someone who can help you to call those companies, follow up, it would be a nice little project. You give it to someone to do that, unless you would like to do. But if you do that, the initial conversation, the initial communication is okay in English, but ideally any information you send across, like leaflets, things like that, is better to be in Chinese, because that means you will get response much sooner. While it's in English, it gets just put aside sometimes. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, certainly it does. It certainly does. Well, one further thing that I'd ask, you know, you mentioned a couple of examples of problem solving. Some of your examples required actually going to China. What would you say to a company that doesn't have the resource, a small company that doesn't have the resource to jump on a plane, and fix £1 million problem, but actually it's a 40 grand problem, and that is maybe, you know, significant to their cash flow? So orders that haven't gone right, some sort of dispute resolution where you can't do that physical FaceTime. Are there any suggestions that you have for those sorts of companies?
I would suggest find someone who know both sides to help if that problem involves not getting the money. And still, it's not something you can just use phone calls, chasing here, email, it won't work. If they have any reason not to pay that, and that if there's a legitimate reason, and that has to be sorted. And therefore, if you really can't afford to have a couple of days of, you know, an economic ticket, then you should find someone in China who can represent you, to go to see them, find out exactly the problem, and report back to you that way. I would think it's just best not to leave it long, because the longer you leave it, the less likely you will get money back.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, I think we're coming reasonably towards the end of the session. So before we go, Ting, I'd like to put you on the spot and say, if there were three things that you would say to a company, a UK company that was starting to trade with China, three sort of top tips that you think are the most important, what would those three things be?
I think the first is really find the right partner to work with. So that is worth by all the effort to find the right partner. That is the top one. I think the second one is really to have a long-term outlook. So don't expect you immediately make money in the first few months. You need to take a longer-term view, invest the time, and once you get over that initial painful stage, you will reap benefits. And the third one I would say is to be open-minded, to be flexible with everything, because that's how the Chinese way works, whether it comes to be renegotiating contract sometimes or being renegotiated, or it comes to have a totally different way of doing business with the Chinese partner. It's that. So don't always just have a fixed mindset. I think that's this. I would like to say that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of our discussion this morning. Please do have a look at Crayfish and the services that they offer to act as an intermediary, as a trusted intermediary and platform where you can find freelancers and people to fill in a lot of those gaps when perhaps you don't have the resources to have a presence on the ground yet, that kind of thing. So definitely a useful service. So thank you very much for your expertise this morning, Ting. And to all of those who joined us, thank you also. And I hope that you found this session valuable or useful. If there's ever any issues that you would like us to cover here at the China-Britain Business Council on our webinar platform, please do get in touch. You'll get an email in the next 24 hours just sending you a link to this recording in case you have a colleague or friend who might have benefited from being here this morning. So that's really it from me. Thanks very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.